Picture the inn in your world. There is the common room with a fire going and light enough on every table to see the faces. Historically, nobody could have paid for that room. Light on every table all evening is what a lord's hall burned on a feast night, and here it's covered by people nursing one drink. So realistically, the inn cannot exist like that. You see, light was bought by the hour, and the moment you can say who pays for the light in a room, it tells you who runs the town. If your world already lights its rooms by spell instead of wick, stay put too, because the test we're about to run doesn't care what makes the light, and the whole back half of this video looks at the same thing with the magic on. Now, the test only makes sense with the cost of an evening's light on the table, and the worst case is the right place to start. A great house could burn 100 pounds of wax and tallow in a single winter night, while a laboring man's whole year around 1300 came to about £2 sterling, which is 480 pence. Depending on how much of the burned wax was the expensive grade, one bright evening in that hall ran from about 5 months of everything the man earned to comfortably more than a year of it. That price is what the candle test is built on, and the test is 3 questions asked in order. Question 1 starts with a count. Take one room on one night in your world and count the hours of light burning in it. Question 2 is 2 words long and needs you to figure out who pays. Question 3 gets answered once for the whole world rather than once per room, because it asks what night actually is in the place your story happens. We'll run all 3 on Wick and Flame first, because the numbers have to exist before the questions mean anything. Start with a count, and the first thing you hit is that a price per pound tells you nothing on its own, because nobody buys light by the pound. They buy it by the hour, and the pound has to be converted before it means anything. Victorian Britain needed a standard candle to measure its gaslight against, and that candle comes out at 58 hours of 1 flame per pound. The standard was set on spermaceti, which is whale wax, a brighter and cleaner burn than anything a medieval household ever bought. Tallow does worse on both counts because its flame is dimmer to begin with, and because the fat runs down the outside and goes to waste instead of up the wick. Now let's run the inn through it. We need to give the hearth its due first, because somebody in the comments is already typing it. A fire lights the ring of seats around itself, so it's only past that ring the innkeeper decides which tables are worth a candle. If we assume 10 flames in the common room and 5 hours after dark, that's 50 hours of flame in one evening, and the standard says 58 hours to the pound, which means one ordinary evening in that room burns very nearly a pound of candles, and that is at the whale wax rate, the brightest burn anybody had measured. An inn burns tallow though, and tallow gives fewer hours to the pound, so the real bill for that evening runs even higher. Tallow ran about 2 pence a pound, and 2 pence was a laboring man's whole day. So a common room, lit the way it sits in your head, burns more than a working man's day of wages every night it opens. And that's before anybody has paid for the ale or the man pouring it. Which brings you to question 2. Not who lit it, who paid for the light, which means whose income the wax came out of, and what else that income was supposed to cover that month. Because the moment anyone starts counting hours, the price stops being one price, and what gets burned decides how many hours the money actually buys. Walk into a hall lit with beeswax and you know inside a second whose house it is, because you can smell it. Beeswax burns bright and steady without filling the room with the smell of a rendering shed. It also ran more than 4 times the price of the alternative, 6.5 pence a pound against 1.5. A skilled carpenter earned 4 to 6 pence a day, so a pound of beeswax cost him a day at the bench and a pound of tallow a couple of hours, which is why the church bought it by the crate, and most households only for occasions that mattered. Beeswax was for lords and for altars, and a man who lights his hall with it has told you his income before he opens his mouth. Tallow is the working grade, and it's rendered animal fat, which behaves exactly the way rendered animal fat behaves once you set it on fire. It smokes and it stinks, and somebody has to sit next to it all evening, because a tallow wick wants trimming every 5 to 20 minutes, or the flame drowns in its own fat and goes out, which means tallow costs not only money but also attention. Below tallow, where most people lived, sits the rushlight, and it's the reason I won't let you write your farmers sitting in the dark. A rush here is a plant, a thin green stem about as long as your forearm, and it grows wild by the thousand in any marsh or wet ditch. Pull a rush out of wet ground and peel most of the skin off it, then dip what's left in whatever fat your household can spare. For most households, that fat was free, because it was the grease the kitchen had already saved. Gilbert White, an English country parson who wrote all of this down in 1775, weighed out a pound of dry rushes and counted more than 1,600 of them. Allowing half an hour to each, he made that 800 hours of light, and he found a careful family got through 1.5 pounds of rushes in a year. So the poor had light. What they did not have was a lit room. And the whole difference between rich and poor at night sits in that one gap. One rush gives about half an hour, and then it gutters, which is just the flame burning down to nothing and going out. There's nothing left to relight either, because a rush burns along its whole length, not down a stub. That leaves somebody in the room deciding every half hour whether the evening is worth another one, which is what question 2 is for. Rooms lit above their grade require somebody else to pay for it. And a world that holds together has an answer for who. So a merchant's parlor blazing with wax means he's either richer than he's letting on, or in debt to a man who is. The rule holds even if the room is lit by a spell instead of a wick, because somebody cast that light, and somebody decided that room deserved it. That leaves question 3, and it has only 2 answers to pick from. Either night is something a person can buy their way out of, an hour at a time, for as long as the money holds. Or night is simply the end of the day for everybody who can't pay to push it back. Which of those 2 your world runs on decides what anybody can get done after dark, and what it costs them to try. Run the candle test on one man and you'll see what it does to a world, one question at a time. Osric works another man's fields outside the wall, which is the least remarkable job in the world and exactly why he's worth following. First, count his hours. His cottage burns rushes, so take White's careful family as the measure. 1.5 pounds of rushes a year works out at a bit over 3 hours of light an evening. Call it 6 or 7 rushes between sundown and bed, and then the room goes dark. Then question 2, which is who pays? Almost nobody. And that's the part people get wrong about Osric. The rushes cost him a walk out to the wet ground and an armful pulled while they're growing, plus an evening at home peeling and drying them for the year. That's work, and it lands on whoever in the house has hands free. But none of it is money. The fat is grease his kitchen already saved, so his light comes about as near to free as light can come. What he cannot do is buy a better grade of it. Tallow is money, and money is the one thing his year doesn't have. So question 3 answers itself. His evenings run as long as he likes, and the dim light is what costs him in the daytime. And the obvious objection is that he could just light more than one, and on a night that matters, he does. What he can't do is make a habit of it, because the grease is free in the sense that no coin changes hands, not in the sense that the pot never empties. 3 dim flames dying every half hour is still not one steady candle at your elbow, which is why some work, like mending a harness, has to be done on a morning he could have been paid for other work. The shortage reaches his daughter too, because any trade that needs light after dark is run by a master who buys tallow, so she can't learn one unless somebody else pays for the candles she'd burn learning it. And on the one night a year the household does buy tallow, for a wake or a birth, that pound costs Osric another day of his life, which he pays nonetheless because a wake only comes once. So every single night he sits under the one flame he can afford, because the lit room his evening wants cost more than his whole day pays. And if your world lights its rooms with a spell instead, hold that thought, because the last stretch of this video is yours. If none of that was on your mind yet, that isn't laziness. There's a working fantasy novelist, K.V. Johansson, worth quoting here. She said, "I always forget how dark it is." Then she gives her reasons, and it's the second one I'm after here. Partly, she explains, it's that she writes shapeshifters and demons who can conveniently see in the dark. But mostly it's that she has spent a dozen years living in town, where it is never dark at all. That's most people, and even those living in smaller villages still know fully lit evenings. Leaving the dark out of a world costs a writer nothing, so it gets left out, and you only ever look hard at the rooms you happen to reread. Now take your turn with it, because I genuinely like the answers in the comments. Run the candle test on the last night scene in your world. How many wicks are lit and who paid for them? Answer both and your world has decided it's nights. Fail either one and it hasn't, because that answer doesn't stay inside the one room you were looking at. Once it's run, what you're holding is a verdict about the whole world. Dark is what happens by itself, and light is something a person went out and bought, which makes every lit room you've ever written somebody's spending decision. A verdict that size never stays in the room it came from, because one real price changes other things you already wrote down, like the hour your tavern actually shuts, and whether the scholar in your story can read after dark at all. That verdict holds right up until one thing rewrites it, and most fantasy worlds already have that thing in them. So say your world has magic, it has a spell for it, or a guild of hedge wizards who'll come and do it for a fee, and what comes out is a light that stays on forever and never needs trimming. That's a completely legitimate thing to have in a world. I'm not going to tell you to take it out. Permanent light is one of the oldest and best ideas in the genre, And nobody invents a spell for cleaning boots and leaves the whole population sitting in the dark. Keep it, then run the same 3 questions at it anyway, because numbers don't care that the light is magic. Go back to that great hall burning 100 pounds in one winter night. Even at the cheap grade that single evening runs to a couple of 100 pence, and a house that lights like that does it again every night of every winter after. Now nobody can tell you what the spell itself costs, because that price is yours to set, but there is the bill it cancels to count as well. Say that hall has a dozen big nights across one winter. That comes to 2,400 pence of light. A laboring man's year, remember, was 480 pence. So one winter of that hall's evenings cost what 5 men earn in a year. Price a permanent light anywhere under a few winters of that, and the Lord has bought a thing he never pays for again for as long as the building stands, which makes it the best purchase available in that world. And a purchase that good doesn't stay rare for long. The Lord buys one at once and the temple buys 40, because a lit room does something to a person who walks in out of the dark, and priests have always known that. Which means inside 2 generations, the only households still burning fat are the ones that could never afford it in the first place. Ask what the wax merchant is worth the morning after. His whole living existed because light was hard to come by, and once it comes free, he's a man with a warehouse full of something nobody needs. It's a thing I've named on this channel before, narrative inflation. And all it means is that a magical convenience nobody pays for drains the value out of everything your story was using for stakes. The same way printing money drains a currency. If light is free and permanent, then nobody in your world has ever been afraid of a dark corridor. Even the word evening would mean what it means to us. A lit stretch of the day instead of the end of it. Now put the candle test to the magic in the same 3 questions. Question 1, count the hours. And the hours are infinite. That's the last easy answer the spell gives you. Question 2 is still who pays. And now somebody made that light, which means whoever made it sets the terms. Then comes question 3. Ask which streets in that city get the lanterns last, and you've drawn the poor quarter of your world without meaning to. A dark street used to be one that hadn't had its turn yet. Now it's one somebody chose to skip. That's not a thought experiment either. Eberron, the Dungeons and Dragons setting built around magic going industrial, lights its city streets with a spell that makes no heat, burns no fuel, and stays lit until somebody puts it out. The people who supply that kind of everyday magic there are tradesmen, not wizards in towers. The man who makes the lanterns works next door to the arcane locksmith, and most of those locksmiths are trained and licensed by one of the great merchant houses. Then out in a small village, people still do the laundry the old-fashioned way. One setting, and it has already settled who makes the light and where it never arrived. So your world can settle the same in an evening. That's one system though, and a world runs on a lot of them. My complete system for building your fantasy world is 10 modules and 60+ lessons that take a world from cosmology all the way to naming. And it comes out the other side as a story-ready world bible. It opens August 24th, and until then the founder pre-order is still open, lifetime access for one payment, with the link in the description below. The answers a world gives to the candle test make better scenes than the problem they replaced. Picture the family 3 generations down from the man who bought the light, living in a house they can no longer afford to heat. They sit in the one room in the district that never goes dark, and every few years somebody comes to buy it off them, and they say no every time. And their reason is better than stubbornness. Whatever the offer is, it's a lump sum, and the morning after they take it, the family is dark for the rest of their lives, because nobody in that house will ever have the money to pay for another one. It's also the only room in the district anybody comes to sit in, which makes it the last reason the neighbors still call on them at all. That refusal makes sense because permanent light is a thing somebody owns. And the moment it exists, your world has an owner of its nights, and that's a person with a name, a house, a rival, and something to lose. An owner shows up in 3 different places depending on what you're building. On the page, it changes 1 scene per book, usually the same one. Every fantasy novel has the scene where 2 people talk at a table after dark, and it's almost always lit like a film set. The cheapest repair is 1 line about who lit it. A servant brings a second candle, the host waves it away, and you've told a reader what that household's month looks like without stopping for a paragraph about money. If your world runs on the permanent kind, 1 line about who granted the light does more, because now the reader knows who the family answers to. Do it once, early, and every night scene after it reads differently. At the table it gets simpler and meaner, because a game master who prices light has handed the party a resource with an owner attached. Torches and lanterns already have a line in most rulebooks, and everybody ignores it. Then comes the night an innkeeper offers to keep the common room lit 1 hour longer for a fee, and your party finds itself negotiating with a man over darkness. And if that setting runs on permanent light, the temple owns it and rents it out by the night. Picture what it charges a family sitting up with a dying man, then picture the winter it puts that price up. That's a whole evening of play, and nobody had to roll a single die to get to it. Then there's the texture of a place. Once light has a price, people build things around that price you would never have thought to invent. Nuremberg, a walled German city that took its knights extremely seriously, kept more than 400 iron chains with locks to match. Drawn across the street mouths at night and locked, they cut the town into districts nobody could slip between in the dark. The word we still use for that hour is curfew, and it's couvre-feu, French for cover the fire, which is exactly what it told you to do. In a town built of wood and thatch, one flame nobody was watching is what took the whole street, so the town made every household smother its fire at the same hour, whether they were finished with the evening or not. Meanwhile, the men who made the candles were organizing. London's wax chandlers had their own ordinances by the 1370s, and the tallow chandlers took a royal charter in 1462. Once a trade is worth that much paperwork, somebody is sitting at the top of it deciding who gets in, and everybody who needs light after dark lives with what he decides. That is what a bored night grows around itself, and your world grows the same shapes around whatever it decided. Price the wick and you get the men who sell it and the men who police it. Hang a light that never goes out and you get the house holding the license, and the chandlers who watch their trade die in a single generation. None of those people existed before you put a price on a candle, and Osric is still out there in the dark, which is the part worth keeping hold of. Once somebody owns the light, Osric stops deciding when his own evening ends, and another man decides it for him. One man with that much say over a whole village is where a crown comes from. The trouble is that most fantasy kingdoms would fall apart inside a year, and it isn't the magic or the map that does it. It's the power that gives way first. That video is on screen right now, so go watch that one next.